Welcome to Deep Look, Ultiworld's weekly show about the current state of Ultimate. I'm the host and a senior editor at Ultiworld, Keith Rayner, and I'm joined by the human who makes this podcast actually happen, our producer, Lindsay Soo, pulling double duty as both producer and guest / co-host for this week's episode with Charlie still out on parental leave. Sue, welcome back onto the program. Glad to have you here to talk about the year that was in 2023.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to get to join the front end of this show once in a while. So happy to be here.
You have total control, really, of how this goes. You can make me look even stupider than I sound in the raw recordings, and you even smarter than you sound in everyday conversation. So, I bow down to the almighty producer. We won't have to get into like a lot of arguments because I'm just going to assume you're right.
Yeah, y'all don't realize how much cutting goes on in the background to make sure that Keith and Charlie sound all polished. We do what we can over here.
It's appreciated. But today's show, we're going to be talking about the biggest stories in Ultimate in 2023. We'll probably get a little bit into maybe some who won the year, who were the biggest winners this year. So stay tuned for that. But before we jump into the main show, I do want to go over some news that we haven't gotten to yet, because had some news stories break over the past week or so. The first, I talked a little bit about U20 tryouts not too long ago, a few episodes ago, and now we have the final rosters for the under 20 national teams that'll be playing at the World Junior Ultimate Championships. Those championships will be in Birmingham, England, in next summer. This year, they added an additional team. This will be the first year the U.S. is sending a mixed team to the U20 Championship. So an additional 24 players are selected. 72 total players selected for the under 20 rosters. Congratulations to all of those who were selected. A lot of names I recognized. A couple of names I was surprised who were on the tryout list, but did not end up making the team. I wasn't at tryout, so I can't speak to that. And I think the young players have a ton of variation in how they play and where they might be from year to year. But definitely some really talented players who got left off the list. But these are going to be the three favorites to win gold in the U20 divisions for sure.
Yeah, I was definitely excited to see, personally, some North Carolina kids making their way back onto these teams. Always nice to see a strong contingent, including a couple kids that I even got to coach on a few occasions, which is fun for me. It's great that there's an extra team. That just means that our youth contingency is growing, and we're able to get that really high level experience for even more players. That's going to help grow the level of Ultimate over the course of the next couple of years in the United States. When somebody posted the announcement in our under 20 Discord channel, and I was not at all surprised for the first reply to be counting the number of kids from Seattle to make these rosters. It's roughly 25% of the rosters are Seattle kids. And as happens basically every time, there was then a debate about whether that's a good thing, bad thing, what it indicates. So this conversation has been ongoing for quite a while. And you and I are going to be talking about that in our sub bonus segment. We're actually going to talk about the U20 team and how representation is spread out across these rosters and where it is in USA Ultimate and how it impacts communities and kids' development. So Sue and I will be talking about that for our subscribers in our subscriber bonus segment. But just letting you know that topic's on the table. Speaking of national teams, not going to dive deep on this one, but the World Ultimate Championships, formerly WUGC. So these are the national teams representing at the senior level, but not the World Games. So this is it's tier 2. I don't know. They've got to come up with a better naming structure
Now that we've got WUC and WUCC, we can't continue at this rate. That said,
trying to explain this to anybody who doesn't play Ultimate is the worst. It's just people are so confused. They don't understand. I mean, I barely understand why we have so many Worlds events. It's quite complex, and hopefully they can figure out a slightly better naming convention.
It's the World Championships, but not that World Championship or that World Championship. It's a different one. And then when you get into like U24 and U20, I mean, I feel like I remember there being some conversation about this on Laying It Out, and they were confused too. I mean, the people in Ultimate are confused by this, so there's a lot going on here. But now that we've clarified, this will be a Team USA chosen by tryout playing against teams from other countries, rather than as club teams as they do at WUCC, where US club teams like Fury and Phoenix go. Okay. So the trial list was announced. 208, I believe, is the number of players invited for tryouts. So pretty big number of players are the top US players. I think that this tryout, along with World Games tryouts and World Games itself, are like basically perhaps the most competitive Ultimate you can find in the world. I'm sure a lot of people are really excited for this tryout, including some of the people on this show. That's right, folks. I've been invited to I've not been invited. It's actually Sue. I wish. Although I would last like 2.5 minutes before I'm like, all right, I got to sit.
Yeah, I'm super excited. I've been really lucky to get to go to a couple of U.S. national team tryouts. And over the course of the time that I've been going to these tryouts, the contingency from North Carolina has grown, which makes things really fun for me because not only do I get to have the experience, I get to do the prep with my teammates and friends in the area ahead of time, as well as have people that I have chemistry with and enjoy playing with at the tryout. But generally, these tryouts are extremely difficult, some of the most difficult times I've ever had playing Ultimate, but also are really fun. And it's a great way to interact with people across the country and get more experience and just, enjoy playing Ultimate.
You prepare for these tryouts? You don't just show up? You're just like, I'm good. What am I going to prepare for?
Yeah, we've actually had a couple people lead pre-tryout camps. We did this last year or 2 years ago before World Games tryouts, and we're doing it again this year before the East Coast tryouts to do a little pre-tryout mini camp type of thing. I'm hoping it'll be a good time and just a good way to get prepared and get some high level reps.
Well, moving to our next news story, I think the UDL might be hoping those tryouts are played with an ARIA disc, or maybe it won't even be. It'll be the AUDL disc at that point. They're really emphasizing the D in AUDL because the word on the street, AUDL will be bringing out their own disc. Have purchased the ARIA brand or ARIA model so that they can make their own disc rather than using the Ultra Star. More details about the story are still emerging, so there may be stuff about this that changes in the future. But it does seem the AUDL is working on its own disc. I'll be curious, I'll be curious to find out what they do with it. If they just take the ARIA and are like, okay, that's cool, let's put the AUDL logo on it, or if they're planning on creating disc golf discs or making variations of the disc, or if they're going to do, I don't know what other stuff they're going to do with it, or how they're going to use this to potentially make more money. But this was an odd story because the moving away from anything from the Ultra Star has been so controversial. Like Ultimate players are so averse to any sort of change. So I know Charlie is a big proponent of like using different discs, of that being something we can manipulate more as a community to achieve better outcomes. And maybe the AUDL will go where no one else has gone in Ultimate, really.
When I first heard about this, my first question was why? It feels a little bit like a waste of resources and an odd place to put your time and effort as the AUDL. But I could only imagine that the hope is to drive a new revenue stream and that they can, I don't know what their relationship with Discraft currently looks like, but if it's not highly beneficial for them, then maybe they think that this will be a good way for them to both, have control over that aspect of the game, as well as, like you said, expand into disc golf, because we all know that's really where the money is coming in relation to disc sports. So I guess that would be my guess. I know Charlie's stance on using different discs in windy conditions, but I can't imagine that the AUDL is trying to make a disc that's better in wind, because the AUDL primarily plays at night, which is not a highly windy time, and that doesn't really seem to be an issue for AUDL games right now. So personally, I don't love the idea of playing with other discs. Fortunately, I don't play in the AUDL, so I don't have to worry about it. But again, seems kind of like an odd choice, but it'll be interesting to see where they take it.
What if they like come out with like specs for teams, and then each team can like slightly modify the disc? So it's like everybody's still playing within this range. Like it will weigh this much and have these features, but the disc might be slightly different if you're playing in Pittsburgh versus if you're playing in Atlanta. And so you get like this home field, like, oh, we're a little bit, a little home field cooking.
The home game discs would allow for some fun deflate gate type scandals to happen in the AUDL. So that could be interesting.
I certainly think playing with a deflated disc is seems like what people want. Like there's people who wish this game was called Flat Ball, which is like literally a deflated disc, right? So we're almost there. Maybe this is like a little signal, like the AUDGL. Maybe there's going to be a disc golf component to the field. I don't know. I also am like not exactly sure what the idea is here, and maybe it is hidden in the details we won't know. Like we don't know how much money they spend on discs each year and how much they could save. So maybe that's where the missing part of the equation is. But curious move. We'll see what comes from it over the course of the next year or two. Our last news story is just looking forward again to WUC. We saw a list of the participating countries that have already confirmed that they will be attending the tournament. And while this is still the registration's still open until almost the end of February, I think. There's only 15 countries on this list currently. Argentina, Austria, Australia, Canada. Australia's hosting, by the way. Colombia, France, Germany, GB, Hong Kong, Italy, Japan, New Zealand, Panama, Switzerland, and the US. There's a lot of concern going around that a lot of European countries will not be able to participate because of the cost of going to Australia. So I would not surprise me to see a big decrease from what we expected to be the size of the tournament in 2020, which I think was, I don't know, is 40 plus different countries I think we're planning to go. So there's been some interesting debates in the Discord about, is this the right way to do things? Like, is it fair that Australia has to travel everywhere? Like it's expensive for Australia. Like should every tournament be held in Europe because that's the only place everybody can afford to go to? I don't know. But it's concerning. Obviously you want to have the best teams there. And I hope that experience is going to be fulfilling for everybody who gets to go, and that more teams are able to apply and get in. But it costs money to go places. That the number one moneymaker in Ultimate is not in Ultimate. It is travel. It is all the money we spend traveling to places to play. I wish there was a way to keep that in the community, but we don't. So, it's always going to be a cost we have to bear. And I think you got to keep in mind when you're planning these things, but when you're planning for the whole world, it's not an easy exercise.
We got to get some airplane moguls in the Ultimate scene. That way we can kind of like recycle it back into the community. Yeah,
instead of us buying Aria from each other, like, why are we buying an airline? Like, let's get Ultimate Airlines going, In fact, if the AUDL could raise enough capital, like they would conquer Ultimate. If they were able to purchase their own airline and just fly Ultimate players places, come on, this has to be highly profitable. Oh, we're stopping the podcast. I'm calling Charlie. I'm calling our accountant. Ulti-World Airlines 2026. Keep an eye out for that.
That'll be one of our bold predictions next episode.
Yeah, I gotta hold that for next year. Don't spread that around, everybody. Keep that on DL.
Yeah, I think that, part of the reasons that people have issues with expenses because there's so many Worlds tournaments. It's just like, people don't know exactly how to prioritize what's the most important. So, and you just really can't do everything. It's really expensive unless, you're in a country that gets government support or your disc federation's support and is able to get that travel covered. But, if it were just World Games or something like that, then you would see more teams wanting to participate every time, but there just aren't enough resources for everyone right now.
I wonder if it's more resource intensive or less to do regional qualifiers for WC. Like that way everybody gets to participate in the like larger exercise with somewhere closer to home that you can reach, but you create some exclusivity for the event itself, which decreases the size, which decreases the cost, ensures that, you know, maybe there's new funding models available there, but maybe it's more expensive to put on additional events. Instead of hosting one event, now you're hosting 6 or 7 events or whatever. But you know, maybe the events can be revenue generating for WIFTIF. I don't feel like people like that as players, even though they benefit from it. We don't have to get into that whole thing, but yeah, I imagine that'll be an idea that people will float around if they aren't already, with the idea in mind of like creating something where we can get more participation, but still have a high quality championship event. So that's going to do it for the news for us. So Sue and I are going to be talking about the biggest stories from the year in 2023. We'll take a look from the college lens, the club lens, internationally, and maybe look at our biggest stories from the year as well. Stay tuned. You're listening to Deep Look. Welcome back to Deep Look. 2023 almost in the rear view now, so Sue and I are going to be taking a look back at the year that was and looking at the top stories from college, club, and international play and picking our favorite stories, or the biggest stories of the year from within these top stories. So I think it only makes sense to start in college, as it's 12 days of college ultimate. We're in the throes of it right now. If you're listening, then we might as well start right where the iron is hot. And I don't think you can talk about 2023 in college ultimate, Sue, without talking about the University of National Champions, UNC Chapel Hill.
Let's go.
No, not UNC Charlotte. Not what other UNCs are there?
UNC Pembroke. UNC Greensboro.
Pembroke. Oh yeah, I forgot about Asheville, Pembroke. No, none of those places. UNC Chapel Hill with 3 straight titles, 6 straight titles. Is that it? With 3 straight titles across 2 divisions for UNC, and they clearly have been the most dominant program of the modern era of college ultimate.
Obviously, there have been other college teams that have individual streaks longer than either UNC team, but I don't know how many times there have been the same school in 2 gender divisions having this much success. So that is certainly unique and stand out for the modern era, as you mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, even what Revolver and Fury, like, is that the only other time that it's been dominance across an entire like ultimate organizational location region, like area? I don't like, this is unheard of for a group within their cohort to be so good. But UNC completes the 3-peat, and it was wire to wire. I mean, there was never really a question about who was going to be the best team in either D1 men's or D1 women's. Even less so in women's. In men's, they got their test from Brown at nationals, but otherwise, I mean, it was pretty clean across the board for both teams, and they looked great running through the finish line too. I mean, they had a few lengths on the competition by the time they crossed the line.
Yeah, and Pleiades has obviously been undefeated for 3 years, and that is also pretty much unheard of. I think the most interesting thing, and part of the reason why college is so interesting, is because there's such a high turnover rate. So being able to retain this much dominance over time is really surprising. I think, obviously it cannot go unsaid that the 5th year, 6th year situation that has been going on has definitely contributed to this. But it's still impressive and won't be easily topped.
So our next story, from one streak continuing at UNC to a streak ending at Wisconsin, the Hodags out of Madison failed to qualify for nationals, ending their qualification streak at 21, the longest active streak. and an impressive feat for Wisconsin, but they'll have to try and start a new streak in 2024 as this one has fallen by the wayside. Carleton and Minnesota were able to advance out of a 2-bid North Central, and this one maybe a bit of a historical streak, a little bit different than some of the other news stories of 2023, but I think it kind of tugs at it feels like, wow, so used to Wisconsin just being there, and every great thing has to end.
Yeah, I think this is not the most surprising thing to happen, as Wisconsin's been a little bit middling over the last couple of years. I think it's a big moment. I think it's interesting. You know, a streak has to end for another one to come in and make the new record. So sad for Wisconsin, sad for the Hodags, but you know, certainly the tides of college ultimate are shifting a little bit in terms of their, you know, blue bloods and powerhouses.
Another short-lived streak that's worth mentioning, Oklahoma Christian, whose streak of national titles and national qualifications ended at just 2, but back-to-back titles, and then they failed to even reach nationals in D3 men's. A shocking ouster. And I to me, I mean, one of the biggest stories of the college season. I really cannot. It's still shocking to me that it happened. The shock factor alone really is the biggest thing, I think, for me.
This is shocking, but it's also, like, given the division, it's not completely surprising because, you know, D3 relies a lot on a couple individual players more so than at the D1 level. And so Oklahoma Christian famously has their scholarship program, which clearly worked. They brought in players that were able to get them 2 consecutive national championships. But, you know, when you lose one of your best players, like at this level, one player makes more of a difference. And so it was obviously shocking to people to see that happen, but to me, it was not as big of a story as some of these other things that are happening.
So we've got some other stories on our list from this year, but is there anything that stuck out to you as one of the biggest stories that we haven't had a chance to talk about yet?
Well, just sticking with D3, I wanted to make sure we mentioned the Middlebury women's three-peat as well. They have been super dominant and successful, partly with the help of Claire Babbitt-Bryan, is she the 2-time player of the year in D3? Yeah, and she was an excellent player for them. They still have a lot of great players, so they are definitely going to be, you know, favorites to at least make it back to the semis this coming year. But just wanted to give them a shout out also for making a really impressive feat.
Yeah, Claire Babbitt-Bryan, 2-time podium winner, but not this past year. So won the 2 years prior and then finished 3rd in podium this past year. So really, I mean, unheard of individual dominance in your division. We've certainly never had a player do all of that. But that's some of that's 2022 stuff, but continued dominance obviously in 2023. And I think they'll be the favorites come into this year again. So could we be talking 4-peat? And they're just starting to, you're getting into, you know, the whoa territory. Like the 3-peat will get you there to being like remembered forever. But 4-peat's starting to be like, okay, is this one of the best teams we've ever seen? You know, that's a lot of winning. Okay, a couple other stories worth noting in college before we jump away. The dropped games, changing the bids at the last minute in D1. The Southwest men's losing a bid to the AC. South Central women's also picked up a bid. There was a bunch of drama around that. Speaking of drama, we had the regionals call that decided the Binghamton-Yale game. Well, not decided it, but had a big factor. I guess you could say decided it. If there's no call, Yale catches it, wins the game, goes to nationals. Instead, they turn it over on a dangerous play, offensive foul call that awarded possession of the defense. Defense goes the other way, scores the game winner. A lot of drama around that. Obviously deciding who's going to win your region and go to nationals. But let's move on to club. What do you say?
Let's do it.
Where should we start in club?
This is a little bit of recency bias, but I have to talk about the Bansfield ejection and that whole situation. That to me is one of the biggest things that has happened to Ultimate in general. To me, it was just like incredible television. And I think it led to one of me as a production nerd, best sequences that we've ever produced in Ultimate in the men's final when Bansfield made it back into the game. It was just made for an incredible story, and maybe somewhat surprising that Bansfield, the one who got ejected, became the hero of that situation, at least in terms of the crowd. But, you just don't see things like that happening super often in Ultimate. That was definitely a big story.
Yeah, it's funny because, like, on the one hand, maybe of all the things across all these lists, this is the least important one. Like, it mostly had very little effect on Ultimate World, but the spectacle of it, the entertainment of it was like just off the charts. It was a little like you had to be there, not literally there, like you could have been watching. But if you were a part of that moment, if you were on social media and caught the clip or whatever, it was just like one of those moments that the community is all in the same place talking about the same thing, and it's like when there's a popular TV show finale and everybody's talking about it the next week. Like it's one of those, it's the what was it? Blue or gold dress. It's that like, oh my God, we're all talking about the same thing. We all care about the same thing in this moment, even though it is super unimportant in the larger scheme of things. There's something about that effect, especially I think in sports where you get these fandom communities like coming together to talk about the same things. Like that is part of what being a fan is about. So I this was a unique event in Ultimate in that way, which I think is part of what makes it big news. I will say, as I look at this list, and I knew this even when we were making the list, it does feel like the men's division dominated the news stories with a bunch of crazy stuff that happened. I don't know why that is. I don't think that's like something inherently about the men's division. It's just that nobody got ejected in the mixed division and came back in the middle of the final. Nobody had an incorrect strip call decide who made semifinals in the women's division. That just didn't work out that way. So the strip call, we could talk about that next because I feel like that was somewhat overshadowed by Bansfield. So like I think in the power rankings it goes down, but like if the Bansfield thing hadn't happened, like I feel like the strip call would have been all anybody was talking about. I mean, the team that went on to win the title, DC Truck Stop, benefited from a call going their way that would have lost them the game in quarters. I mean, it's wild to think about. There's a strip call that is upheld by the observers. It's awarded to the defense by the observers. And later footage clearly shows that the offense had possession of the disc first. I have not seen a scene like that. I mean, you had people talking to USA Ultimate 30 minutes after the game. You had teams arriving late to their games afterwards. I mean, it was just, I don't want to say madness, but it had the energy of being at WCC when we were moving inside kind of stuff. Like, what is going on? I've never seen this before. That was a crazy story to me.
Yeah, that's definitely a big one. I just want to give my opinion on this. I think that, I was in the crowd of the semis, the Trucks semis game, and there was a lot of Truck doesn't deserve to be here, like jeers in the crowd at that time. And personally, like my very strong opinion on this is that this was just a blown call. Like it sucks. It sucks that it happened, but it was a blown call. It was not Truck's fault that they were participating in a call that was gotten wrong. It's just what happens. And the benefit of this is that it led to a change that is putting an observer into the production booth so that they can review the calls and help get the right call happening, which I think is a great thing. Obviously, it sucks for Dig, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles sometimes. What I think is also interesting about this, like you said that the Bansfield situation was overshadowing the strip situation. I think that the strip situation was also overshadowing just a general storyline of the tournament, that there were 3 teams from Pool A that ended up being in the semifinals. And like that 2 of those teams had to like fight through quarters to get back there, which is just kind of an interesting outcome of the random draw that we saw, which I'm not sure if that's for better or for worse of the situation, but it was definitely an interesting outcome.
Yeah, I mean, there was a wild round of Ultimate in San Diego right there. But Pool A, honestly, I don't want to talk about Pool A. It makes me feel bad. I was not right about my predictions about Pool A in the men's division. So I'm gonna make it the producer call. I'm gonna be the producer here and say we're gonna cut that segment. We're not actually gonna cut the segment, but we're not gonna continue talking about Pool A. No Pool A here.
All right.
Okay.
Fine, Keith. Fine.
Women's division story. The biggest thing to me. It's funny because all year it felt like it was Scandal's story, right? Like Scandal was the team. Claire Trope, Scandal, rise up, and then all of a sudden at the last moments, Brute Squad goes from having like kind of this middling year was disappointing, I think, by a lot of people's estimations of what Brute Squad's capable of. And then all of a sudden they come out and they kick everyone's ass at Nationals. And they win the title. And like, I can't decide who has the bigger story. I mean, I guess you got to give it to the title team, right? Like Brute has the kind of up and down year. I think some people had almost written them off as like primary title contenders even. By the time we got there, all the conversations about Scandal, it's Fury, it's Molly Brown. And now, look who's laughing now. It's Brute. I look back at the year and I think about those two teams.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because Scandal was part of like the most exciting games of the season. They had a crazy final with Fury at US Open. They actually had two crazy games with Fury at US Open.
Yeah.
One in their crossover and then in the final where Fury had an insane comeback, but they were able to hold him off. And then they also had another crazy game against Fury at Pro Champs where Scandal had the crazy comeback and won on Universe. And, they had a Universe game against Molly in the semis. And I think that pretty much everyone, even throughout the tournament, seeing Brute be great, thought that Scandal was going to win, was going to take him down. Because, as you said, Brute did not have a good regular season. Their offense did not look great throughout the course of the season or even that tournament. But in true Brute fashion, their defense was just what carried them to another championship. And I think it is an interesting question. Like we always come back to talking about, does the regular season matter? And it's interesting. I think this is an interesting case study of that question. Obviously, Brute won a national championship, but does that mean that they were the best team this year? I don't know. They managed to win this tournament and they were the best team at this tournament, but over the course of the season, they weren't the best team. And, if they played those games multiple times, if we did a series, would they have won the national championship? I don't know. I think that Scandal probably would have taken it if they had played that final more than once.
Wow. The new making our own news here. Scandal declared national champions by Deep Look producer.
I did not say that. That's
So any other story that jumps out to you from the club division?
This is a smaller story, but it's interesting that this was the first time in many years that the number one overall seed of the mixed division made it out as the number one seed of pool play. Usually, over at least like the past 5 seasons, whoever is seeded first loses a game in pool play at some point. But, Shame, who has had a couple of years of looking pretty good in the regular season and not so hot at Nationals, finally pushed through and take Nationals as, number one seed and champion.
Just look at the mixed division. Look at the mixed division. You get like double-digit seeds, reaching bottom seeds in pools, going to the final, and somehow the number one overall seed winning is like, it's the surprise. You know what I mean? Like, chalk in the mixed division is chaos. Like you expect chaos. So for the number one seed to win, and there was plenty of chaos in the mixed division, don't get me wrong. Number one seed wins. It's like, wow, I can't believe the number one team actually won, because it just doesn't happen anymore. Yeah. They were like 500 in pool play over the past 5 seasons or something. I did the math on it. The number one seed was not doing well. So for Shame to pull it off is obviously worthy of compliment. Player of the year, Jay McLaughlin leading the way. But mixed just continue to be mixed. It makes no sense. The points are made up. It's madness out there. Other stories from their club division. I feel like we can't talk about club without talking about Pony. From being talked about as potentially the one of the most talented teams of all time in the men's division, didn't even make semifinals. A lot of injuries and stuff cropping up for them. So there's a lot of like asterisks again for a second year. So it's wild to think of how far we came from what we were saying about Pony before the season started to what we were saying about them by the time it ended. Sockeye fails to qualify for nationals. You had the first year of the random draw for club, the World Cup draw. It's not random, but the World Cup style draw in play. Mixed reviews. I think it depends on which side of the spectrum you were on, but I thought it was entertaining, so I'm not against it. Fury, just them not winning, not being in the final is like a story. That's Fury for you. They missed by a single point reaching the final, and it's like, oh my God, Fury didn't make it. But they weren't exactly dominant during the regular season either. So, what are the larger implications potentially for this story about what it means in the women's division?
Yeah, I think it's just interesting that it's the first time that they've gone into nationals not undefeated since 2019. So obviously they still made it very far. They're still a very good team, but I think it has more implications for next season, what we think of them. If it's all these same players returning, are they still going to be the favorite because it's still all those great players and it's still Fury, or are we going to be looking at them different now and looking at some other teams as being, the top contenders?
The invincibility maybe finally starting to fade from them. Someone finally took the Infinity Gauntlet off their hand, and maybe they're beatable now.
We'll see. See.
All right, our final category here: international play. We got a few, not the same number of stories here, but still some pretty big ones. Where do you want to start, Sue? What are some of the big stories to you in the international realm of Ultimate?
This is fun for me because I got to be working with Ultiworld at a lot of these international events and got to see this stuff in person. I'll again start with recency. Talk about the France beach mixed team who won the tournament, but I think the even bigger story was they beat the US in the semifinals, which is interesting, not just because beating the US, but they were 4-2 in pool play. Like they didn't even have like the best tournament, but they still were really successful when it came to the bracket and able to take the whole thing. And I think it made the world look at them a little bit differently and was really, really fun to watch. I really enjoyed watching them play, and they have some serious stars and fun style. And it's always interesting to see when international teams beat the US, just because it doesn't happen that often.
It doesn't, although it's starting to feel a little less like speaking of invincibility, that the US's might be wearing off a little bit. Like I think the US is going to be the favorite. I think that's going to be the case for a long time. That doesn't mean they'll always be undefeated. I think we're at the point where like I expect the US to lose like 1 to 2 games per year in international competition. Like whether it's beach, U20s, U24s, like well we have another pretty robust slate. The World Games, they dropped a game. Like I think we're getting to the point, like I don't know how you figure WUCC into that. Like obviously US teams are going to lose games there, but I guess even if you just look at national teams, like I think the US is probably going to lose a game in 2024, if not 2 or more. I think that's kind of become a little more par for the course. But that's because of teams like France, stepping up. Big year for France, by the way. But yeah, there's a lot to look at there, and I think a lot of our stories are really about these nations that challenge the US.
Well, I think part of the reason that they were successful at beach mixed is because France had a very narrow focus. Spain had a similar trajectory. Like they made it to the finals as well, and their international development was really focused on beach, and that's what they practiced a lot, and that's where they were able to have success. If you're looking at U24s, France didn't send teams to U24s, even though there were several players on that beach mix team that would have been eligible for it. So while you're right in that the US is not quite as invincible as they have been in the past, it takes some kind of narrowed focus, and the US being spread a little bit more thin for that to happen.
Fair. You mentioned we're talking about France and beach. Elliot Bonnet, the big star there, and part of kind of a wave of international stars, which I think is another big story It's just the rise of these individual stars from the international community, stepping up and they're playing against and in the U.S. And that kind of is the bar for being considered one of the best in the world. Whether it's the German players on Brute Squad, Leif Kowalczuk and Troutman. They also had Colombian players across those teams and some of the other top teams. You had Kanari Imanishi coming from Japan to play for Fury. You had Dan DeMarais, who was awesome for U24s for the Belgian team. There were just a number of players who I think really made a name for themselves on the international stage, and a lot of them are young. A lot of these players have a lot of years in front of them to continue to not only dominate in these high-level spots, but to help their communities continue to grow and rise. And so I think this kind of wave of these young international stars is really exciting, and was one of the biggest things to pay attention to in 2023.
Absolutely.
Other stories from international, I mean, to me, those felt like the two biggest ones. We saw the U24 Belgian team, I think, kind of captured hearts in the men's division with their run against the U.S. They were a super exciting team. We talked about Dan DeMarais, but they had a bunch of big playmakers. I think that was one of the fun stories to follow during the year. We've seen major growth of Ultimate in China. That feels like another big one. What are going to be the long-term effects there? What's driving that growth? Like, will we see it continue? There's a lot of, it feels like money coming into Chinese Ultimate in a way that we're not seeing in a lot of other places in the world. So, like, what are going to be the ramifications of that? There's going to be a lot of attention on Chinese national teams playing in international play as we are all kind of looking to be like, okay, what's going to happen with this?
The only other international story that I could think of is Revolution losing in Colombian nationals. Obviously, the Cardenas twins left that team and started their own team. So that's a big part of why that change happened. But it's definitely kind of the end of an era with Revo being such a huge international star power for a really long time. And now they didn't even win their own Colombian nationals. They did end up winning the PALC Pan American Ultimate Championships in the women's division this year, but Makana was not at that tournament. So it's just interesting to see how those dynamics are changing a little bit.
Yeah, I think that especially if you rope those two stories together, like a second team being formed by the players that were kind of like stars of this Revo franchise, like I think there's some intrigue in what that means for Colombian Ultimate. But it's just Revo is one of, if not arguably, like the most popular team in the world. So for part of their star power to splinter off and then beat them is definitely a cool story to follow. All right, so Sue, now we've laid out a lot of different stories from the year. Maybe there's a couple we missed. You're not beholden to the list that we laid out. What to you is the biggest story of the year?
This is tough for sure. And I am definitely biased here, but I think that the UNC three-peating is probably the biggest story for me. Partially because it's not just a story of this year, but it's a story of multiple years. It's a story of building that has been continued over the course of several years. And, people are talking about it. People hate it. People want UNC to lose so badly. And I think that in and of itself is part of what makes it such a big deal and makes it such a big part of this year.
Sad to say, but I think I would probably go the same way. I think that the UNC double three-peat it's got the historical factor. It's got the star power. It feels monumental in a way. So yeah, I think I'd probably go with that. Behind that, to me, it's either. We actually didn't talk as much about this as we probably could have. The pony thing feels like a big story to me. Like we were so, it's easy to forget how hyped we were about this team. Literally, people were saying this could be the best men's division team ever. Like maybe now that seems silly and it's like, joke's on you, or like, oh yeah, maybe you were saying that, but I was definitely not saying that. I mean, people were looking at this roster and seeing, when we did our top 25 players, like there's like 10 pony players who are getting votes. You know, a bunch of the top 10. Like it's wild. And then they don't even make it to semis. Like not even like they just fell short. Maybe they get to the national final and lose on Universe or something. Like that's different. They didn't even make it to semis. Other stories that I think like I would consider, bids changing hands at the last second in college. That felt like such a big deal at the time. The international stars, that to me is another contender. Those feel like the bigger stories of the year to me. That group.
Good picks. Good picks.
All right. So our final topic of looking back at the year, just a little game here, a little fun. Who won the year? And do you want to keep it to just individuals, or could a team win the year?
I think we can keep this broad. I have a couple people that I would be considering to be having won the year, but I don't think it's, there have been years in the past where it's like there's clearly one player who has been like the talk of the town across the whole season, but I don't think that's the case so much this year. But so yeah, if you've got a team, I think that could be included as well.
Okay, so who are you thinking about for folks who might have won the year here?
Okay, I've got a couple options. If you're talking just like amount of on-field success or like big tournaments won, I think Ben Dameron is a good contender. Obviously he won nationals with UNC, he won U24s, and made it to the semifinals of club with Ring.
Yeah, he definitely picked up a lot of steam. I mean, a lot of individual accolades, ended up having an awesome club season, all club level play. He's definitely a worthwhile candidate with the success that he had this year. I'm trying to think of other individuals who I feel like would be up there. I mean, I think that you could say is counterpart, so to speak, in Don Colton. A lot of similar success. Not quite the same level of club success, but gets the added semi-pro success too. So I think Dawn could be on that list. Lily Troutman.
For sure.
I mean, I don't know if you want to pair her with Livka or keep them separate, but like, yeah, you get the Brute Squad title, became such a big, like, is part of that group of young stars, I feel like.
Yeah, she kind of came into the stardom this year, whereas Levka came into stardom a little bit more last season, but definitely they were both like instrumental for Brute's success. Another player that you can't not talk about is Claire Trope. She didn't necessarily have, the as many like big wins. Obviously, Scandal fell short in the finals of Club Nationals, and DC Shadow also lost in the finals of PUL championships. But I mean, Claire Trope, it was clearly, one of the best players on both of those teams, and she was nearly unanimously chosen as like the best player in North America in our top 25. Obviously, she had a fantastic year, and she also, not to forget, she just won a gold medal with Beach. So she's been like a huge player. I mean, she was last year as well, but is definitely one of the players that is one of the biggest standouts of the year.
I'm thinking of other potential big winners from the year. Henry Ng, gets a Player of the Year award in D1 Men's, finishes on the podium in Club Mixed. Neither of his teams quite have the individual success, I'd say, to like put him over the likes of Dameron and Colton and Trope and such, but worthy of recognition for the year that he had. Also gets the gold medal boost. How about this one? Sticking with mixed division, Jolie Krebs.
Okay.
Gets Binghamton to 3 straight nationals. Shows out at nationals. So good at nationals that like played herself into awards contention at nationals. She was like getting All-American votes, and then goes ahead and turns around and parlays that into a great club season too. Finishes in the B Pody award. So yeah, not quite to the level of these other players, but I'm thinking of like honorable mentions basically at this point.
For sure. I love that.
Are there any like organizations that maybe we're missing? I'm trying to think if there's anybody who just had like a huge year.
I think like DC Ultimate in general had a really big year. There's like a lot of success on the club level. success in the pro level, and a lot of those players making national teams and being standouts like at the international level.
Yeah, you get a men's title, you get a runner-up finish in the women's division, but also in the PUL. You get Claire Trope, you get Christian Boxley, who like maybe he's an honorable mention, someone who like asserted himself as potentially the best player in the men's division. Yeah, I could see the case for DC Ultimate as a conglomerate.
And a bunch of those DC people, ending up on those beach teams that were so successful, and especially on the men's side, like that truck contingency was a real core of their offense, and it was a big part of their success. So they're definitely very strong in the adult divisions. Maybe not having as strong as they have in the past in the youth divisions, but still overall very successful.
Pretty interesting year. And who would you think you'd give the crown to? I think I'm ready to go with Ben Dameron.
All right, Ben Dameron. I'd say Ben Dameron or DC. Those would be my strongest.
I'm with that. We can say that those are the folks who won 2023. I'm sure there is like, maybe we should have phoned in our boy Patrick Stegemeller to give us the esoteric take on like how people who wear this certain brand of clothing won the year or whatever. I don't know.
What about New York? New York sent more teams. How many teams did they send? They sent 4 teams to nationals this year. Speaking of Patrick Stegemeller and Blueprint.
I'm sure he could have come up with a way which Blueprint won the year, right?
Like for sure.
That's part of Pat's superpower. Okay, so before we wrap up the show, Sue, got to do our question of the week for this week.
Sounds good.
So we got a question in from Maxwell in Discord. If you want to ask a question of the week, just got to use your subscription to jump in the Discord. Let us know what questions you got in the mailbag channel. And I think this is a great question for you because you handle production for us. So would Ultiworld ever consider doing a mic'd up for players, and what players do you think would do a great mic'd up segment?
Okay, this is a great question.
Shout out to B Ultimate for doing this at Nationals.
Yes. If you haven't seen the B videos, the mic'd up videos, you should definitely check them out. They're awesome. They're really fun. I have a little egg on my face here because Keith actually brought this up to me last year around Club Nationals time and was proposing us doing some sort of mic'd up of players. And I totally poo-pooed it and said that it was a bad idea and that players wouldn't want to do it. And I didn't think that it would work out super well, just like in our current context of Ultimate. Clearly, I was very wrong.
For the record, I did not remember that conversation. So that's totally irrelevant that I did not bring this up because of that. Okay.
Yeah. I just want to make it clear that that I was wrong there and that this mic'd up was super awesome when B did it. We'd have to think a little bit about how we would want to do it. Particularly with Ultiworld, it would be interesting to try to incorporate that as like a little segment in a live portion. And that would be like an interesting way for us to differentiate than just doing what B's doing, because they obviously are doing it in post. I think clearly the answer is like, this is a good idea and that we should be doing it more. And, shout out to the Continent Tour who had the Trash Talk mic during their games, which was a fun way to incorporate this kind of thing in a live broadcast. In terms of who should be doing it, this is a good question. And I think that there are a lot of players that would be good. The first one that comes to mind is Khalif. I think that it would be really interesting to hear what he has to say. He seems like he's got some great trash talk going and just like some fun chatter on the sidelines. I think he would be really interesting to have.
Yeah, this is a non-exclusive list. And I think if memory serves, when we talked about there being kind of a logistical challenge for us of like, you don't know when somebody's going to say something. Like, are we going to mic them up for the whole game and then just go back and listen through for whatever they said that was interesting? Or are we going to like mic them up for 20 minutes and hope that we get the good stuff in that 20 minutes. Like there's kind of a like, okay, exactly how do you do this? I think we're going to have to go to B Ultimate and be like, all right, what was the methodology here? How did you make sure you got some good stuff to say? How much mic'd up audio is down on the cutting room floor? And And like they have video to go with it. So like they weren't just like they were videoing players while doing it. Like that's a pretty resource intensive. So I'm curious how exactly they went about capturing this.
Yeah. So, well, I have two thoughts on this. First of all, full disclosure, I was captured as a mic'd up player at Nationals for one of our games. They only did it for a half, and they just had one camera at the back of the end zone, I think mostly just following me for that whole half. And obviously they just cut these down to like minute long videos. So they're able to just take the best of it and just get a little bit of content out there. If we were to do it live, I think that it's an interesting challenge. And I've seen, at least in the WNBA, I've seen them like incorporate it some into their productions. What I would imagine that we would have to do is, focus on either a player or a coach or something for a half, but we'd have to have somebody dedicated to like going through the footage or like listening and cutting some of this audio and have a camera that's like following them to be able to just like cut some of the highlights of it and to be able to like play that as like just a little bit of color to add to the broadcast in like the second half or something like that. But it would definitely take it would be resource intensive for sure.
Okay, as for players who I would want to hear mic'd up, they already got to some pretty good ones. And you mentioned Khalif. I think either Schaffner player could end up with some pretty entertaining stuff. Saul Yannick is another player who I think is really vocal that comes to mind.
Oh, we're missing the obvious one, Keith. We're missing Alex Atkins.
Dang it. I was just going to say Alex Atkins and Johnny Batesfield. You just got to get the pair for the next time they see each other.
Yeah, we got to know what's going on there.
Joe White could be one.
Oh, yeah. Another one that comes to mind for me is Sheena Titcomb. Sheena communicates on field more than any player that I've ever played with. And I think that would be interesting and like informative, I think, for people to see, and like people could like really learn from them.
There's like kind of two schools here. You go for like the oh, this person says really insightful, thoughtful, communicative things that are really great to hear. And then there's this person's hilarious. This person says preposterous, ridiculous things on the field that like I just want to hear them be silly. I mean, Alex Atkins is openly trolling everybody on the field. Yes. So like, yes, that's funny. Like, it's annoying probably when it happens to you, but I'm sure it's funny too. So yeah, versus like somebody who's providing incredible feedback and leadership and stuff. Like, I guess you could even split that one into like technical talk and like leadership stuff. So yeah, there definitely are some players who I want to hear. I mean, Ben Dameron was saying some crazy stuff. Well, I know we talked about him. I heard him on the sidelines talking some crazy stuff. Sean Keegan is another person who talks a lot of trash, has a lot of funny quotes. So yeah, there's some strong candidates out there. I would want to hear Sadie Jezierski, Caleb Denacor.
I'd also like to hear from a coach.
Yeah, is there a coach? I mean, I look. I want to know what Maddie Sang's doing out there, all the time. I would just listen to Maddie Sang radio,
It's a good one.
Just a constant stream of what he has to say. Me, my goat, Miranda. Of course, I want to hear Miranda coach. Yeah, there's definitely a whole different can of worms going down the coaching rabbit hole. Some people you just like love to hear how they think about the game. So yeah, that's very much my style. So that's going to wrap it up for this week's Deep Look. As I mentioned earlier, Sue and I will be talking about how U20 representation is handled as far as regional representation and community representation on U20 teams in our subscriber bonus segment. So you can subscribe and listen to that. But otherwise, we will catch you next week right here on Deep Look.